Pretty cool. So naturally, there are two things that we want to have happen when we create data. One of the things is we want to prevent who can actually do it. Like right now, anyone who has access to that URL could actually make a new blog post. So the first thing that I want to do for that is use the login required decorator. So we'll do from django.contrib.auth.decorators. We're going to import the login required decorator. Now with this, I can just go ahead and say at login required. And this is a wrapper that goes around this view and checks whether or not this user has a session and they are a valid session, so they're actually logged in. So we come into our blog new. In my case, it works because I'm still logged in to the admin site, right? If I go into an incognito window, as in I'm not logged in, it does not work. It actually prompts me to log in. Now I can change where I log in, right? So I can come in here and say login URL equals to /login and try that again. And I get an error. Let's restart the server. Refresh. And we'll go to blog new. And there we go. So it actually changes that URL. Now I can also change this in my settings really simply by going into settings and saying login URL and changing wherever that is. And then in my view, I don't have to do that argument anymore. So we take a look, copy that, paste it in, and sure enough, it changes where it needs to go. Okay, well, that's cool. There is another decorator that we will talk about, and that has to do with whether or not the user that's trying to access this is staff. The other one is called staff member required. And you can actually use two decorators together if you want. In my case, I'm just going to have one. Okay, so I'll go ahead and import the staff member required decorator. It's from a slightly different place, and it's from django.contrib.admin this time. .views.decorators import staff member required. Okay, and now that we've got that, we look in to our admin to any specific user. Let's rerun the server. And we see that there's this permissions aspect where we can do staff status. And that just means that they have to have staff status to actually get to that page. And if we go to blog new, it automatically forces you to log in to the Django admin, which is pretty cool. So we now have two ways to protect any view. We can do it for any logged in user or a user that has permission to do these things. Now, if you have like a bunch of blog writers on your staff, then yeah, staff member required might work. You could go into doing more additional customization, but at this point, these are both really good for what we need now. So one other thing that we need to talk about is actually associating any given blog post to a specific user. So the other thing that we do when we want to create data is actually associate that data to a specific user. And we do this by declaring what's called a foreign key into our blog post. What a foreign key means is that we can tie in one model to another. It joins these models together so we can do all sorts of really cool things. We'll see what that means in just a moment. Now, what do I want to actually associate this blog post to? Well, I want to actually associate it to a user, as in the user that's actually adding this blog post. So I'll do models.foreign key, and we need to actually get the model that's related to this user. In other words, we need to get the user model here, right? So to get the user model, we have to do it in this way. We do from django.conf import settings, and we say the user model is equal to settings.auth user model. Now for users, this is literally the only way you do it, right? Because if you change the default Django user model, this would still work versus actually trying to import the model class itself. If you don't know what I mean, it's okay. Just remember, whenever you need to use user, do this. Okay, so we'll go ahead and say user. And I'm going to go ahead and add a default in this case. And I'll say the default is my first user, which in my case is my super user, right? And that goes back to like the null blank stuff when we actually changed the database. But now that I've made some changes to this model, I'm going to go ahead and run. Ooh, we get an error. And it's saying it's missing a positional argument on delete. Now this is a new thing for Django 2.0. So older versions of Django inferred it did something like this. So models.cascade. So what that means is if I delete this user, like the actual user from the database, it would delete everything related to it, including this blog post, right? But what I want to do is set null. I want to make sure that if I delete this user, everything that's related to that user is going to be set null, and you'll see what that is in a second. So I'll say null equals to true there. And now we're going to go ahead and run our migrations. So python manage.py, make migrations, and then python manage.py, migrate. Okay, so we run that server again. And let's go ahead and look in the admin. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new user. And I'll just call it author. Like as in, this is a blog post author. I'll give them staff status. I gave them a whatever password. And I'm going to go ahead and add them to a new blog post. Okay. Grab that author. Right, so they're associated to this blog post now. Another title slug or something, and then content. We hit save and continue. Sure enough, we've made that. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete that user. That user is now deleted. So this object in our database is going to be deleted. And then now when we go to our blog posts and we go to that recent one, it actually goes back to the default user. Right, so in this case, the reason it went back to the default is because I set a default. Otherwise, it would go to null. It would be completely empty. So that's pretty cool. That's if you had someone on your staff that did a bunch of stuff and then you needed to remove them from Django. This would be a way to do that. And in our case, we actually set a default value. So then that user stuff would go back. Now, there is one other thing that I want to show you about this, and that is by jumping into the shell. So we do python manage.py shell. And this time, I'm going to do a different kind of import for the user model, and that's from django.contrib.auth. We're going to import the function called getUserModel, and we'll say user equals to getUserModel, and use those parentheses to actually get that. So this is the actual user class. Right? So we don't want to import the user class from here ever. You want to import it. If you're using it on models.py for a foreign key, you do it like this. If you're using it anywhere else, you do it like this. So the reason for this is I can say, let's say j equals to user.objects.first, right? I only have one user at this point. I deleted that other one, right? So I now have this user j. How do I actually get all of J's blog posts? Well, J has, or that user has, a foreign key to blog posts. So I can actually do a reverse lookup that does j.blogpost_set.all. I'll explain that in a second. But we hit enter, and that gives me the query set that's related to this user. Notice I did not import the blog post itself. Right, that blog post class. All I did was grab it from that user's instance. And this is what foreign keys do. They actually associate this data in a way that we can do these kind of dynamic lookups. Now, the reason I knew is blogpost.set, or blogpost_set rather, is because the actual foreign key is on this model. So all you need to do is lowercase the name of the model. In this case was blog post, and then use _set. And that will actually give you the query set that's related to this user. I realize this might feel pretty uncomfortable, but just remember that whenever you need to get the reverse of this data, you can do it this way. I will show you one last way to actually get that data, and that's actually importing that model itself. So from blog.models, import the blog post, and then the same exact query set will be blog post dot objects dot filter user equals to that user instance right here. Or you could do something like user underscore underscore ID equals to j.id. Both of those lookups would work. And then we look at that query set. It's the exact same. So those are literally the same ways on how to do it. But of course, this one gives me like a lot less work to make this happen. We're going to revisit this again, but I just want to make sure you knew that that is one of the powerful things of using a foreign key. Instead of saying that our author is, some sort of author and we put it in as a char field or a character field, which is fine if you need to do it that way, but actually associating it to the user does have one more benefit. Now, of course, there is still one other benefit that we didn't talk about. All we showed you was how to create a blog post in the admin. And I would imagine you could do it in the shell too. I think you have enough skill at this point to be able to do it in the shell. But I'll give you a little hint. It's blog post objects.create, and then you add the fields that you need. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of that old shell, and I'll run the server again. The other benefit to using a foreign key versus like a field to actually associate the user is to use it in our view. So we added these decorators here for a reason. That reason is that we know now that request.user will actually return something, right? Because of either one of these decorators. If they weren't in here, we'll actually take a look at that too. So with that, that means that I can come in here and say object.user equals to request.user. It's just really that simple. So now when I go to create a blog post, I can come in here and create another one with some weird slug, and hopefully that works. And it does. We go into our blog post here and 10, and sure enough, it's associated. Now, maybe you're like, wait a minute, we set that as the default anyway, so how is that possibly correct? Well, let's go ahead and test it out with a new user. So again, I'll bring back that author user. I'll use a whatever password, and I'll give them staff status, right? So we'll hit save and continue. We're going to open up an incognito window now into our project here, and then I'll go ahead and go to blog new. This will prompt me to log in to the Django admin. We go into our author, and it brings me back into the actual blog post, and I'll say, something like this, and whatever. I hit send. We look back into the admin from our other user, the main super user. We see that we have a new blog post, and sure enough, there is our new author. So this, of course, is that other benefit, is being able to actually set that data when you create data, right? To actually set it to the requested user, and now it's associated going forward. Now, if you didn't have these decorators in here, let's say, for instance, it was like this. What's actually going to happen? Well, I'm going to go back into the incognito window. I'm going to make sure I'm not logged in. In my case, I'm not logged in. It says anonymous user. And now I'm going to go and do blog new, and I'll type some stuff out. Let's make sure I have an actual original post here. I hit send. Then I get this, right? So this is a valid error, and it's saying that it can't assign an anonymous user to the user field in our blog post model. That means that this right here can't be the class of anonymous user, right? So if you're not logged in, you're not the actual user model itself. So to solve this, there's a couple things that you would do. Well, of course, you would use those decorators. Another would be if not request.user.is authenticated, then we would return some other template, some other data, right? So like, let's say not a user.html. I don't have that. I'm not actually going to implement that because I don't think this method is good in the long run. But now that I have that, I Let's go ahead and refresh this page. Now I get a template does not exist. That's expected because we didn't make the template. But that would be a way that you could solve this problem without using these decorators. But of course, I want to use these decorators, so bring it back. And now, of course, it's going to force me to log in. So I'll go ahead and get rid of this. It's just a method to show you how to handle actually associating a user to form data of some kind. Pretty cool. Now the question is, how do we use this model form to actually perform our updating? Right? We have our creation, we have our detail view. Now we need to go ahead and actually update this particular object, whatever that object might be. So to do this, we want to bring in that form again, so the exact same form. And yet again, I'm going to go ahead and use the form.html. And this time, I'm going to go ahead and do a title and say update. And then whatever my object is, I'll use the f-string substitution with obj.title. Right, I don't need to actually send this object in anymore because I'm using form.html as my template. And then I'm going to go ahead and pass that form in as context as well. Okay, so now that we've got our form in here and we have our title, we're going to add one more thing into the initializing of the form, and that is instance. So we looked up the object here, right? So it's based off of this view, so it's actually updating this object. We can pass into our model form an instance, and what that will allow us to do, let's go back into any given blog post here. So let's take a look. We've got all of our different blog posts. I'm certainly going to have to link these soon too. Let's go to the Hello World one. Okay, so go to Hello World, and then I said edit. Okay, okay. So a couple things here is I've got a invalid view. Now that's because in my actual view I didn't pass the slug little thing that I missed when I did that, but that's okay. We're fixing it now. And I refresh in here, and we've got all of our stuff. We've got our title, our slug, and so on. If I send this now, title has already been used. Please try again. Hey, wait a minute. This is the one that's using it. So, of course, that's related to our form validation stuff. That's this right here. Okay. So let's go ahead and comment that out. Just for a moment. We'll fix it for real. And I'll do it again. Save it. Cool. Looks like it's working this time around, right? So we look back in our blog post, into that title. Let's just change the content so we can see that the value's changed. Value has changed. We say send. We refresh in here. The value has not changed. Well, why is that? Well, of course, we didn't do anything with that data. So we'll say if form.isValid, then we just do form.save. We run it again. Send it again. You can do it a million times if you want. We refresh, and sure enough, it's saved. So I just had that update view work. That's all we had to do. That's it. Just like that. So passing this instance allowed that to happen. But of course, we still saw the problem of this right here, right? So we need to solve this problem. We need to make sure that we can still validate data if we're updating something based off of the same form. Because I bring that back, I might want that in other places. So I certainly need it here. Now, oftentimes when you want to diagnose something like this problem, what I end up doing is printing out the directory of self. So whatever's coming through in self, I want to see what that is before I do any Googling. So I hit send, and I come in here, and I have all of these things that are associated to self or that specific instance, right? So what are the things that I'm looking for? Well, what I actually am looking for has to relate to the instance itself. I want to actually see if this field or this form has any relation to the instance, right? So the self is the actual form. It's the instance of that form, right? So in other words, it's this. and this, and this. So in any method there, I want to see what's inside that method, and I want to specifically have the instance. And sure enough, there it is. Right, so you go through them. There's the instance right there. So let's go ahead and say instance equals to self.instance, and we'll just print out what that instance is. Now, before I go any further, I want to make sure that any other view that's using this form doesn't have any errors with me doing even this. So let's go to our other view. I'm going to go ahead and leave that open. And we'll go to the blog-new. Okay. So I'll create another title with some weird content in it. And I'll hit send. I get none. Okay, cool. So the instance is either going to be none or the actual object itself. Hopefully not a huge surprise there. But that means that this value then I can actually use inside of my query set. So I can say if instance is not none, then our query set equals to the query set dot exclude pk equals to instance dot pk. That's the same thing as saying ID is equal to instance dot ID, because those are the same values, but it's cool to see that we can do that. So what this does is it takes our query set that matches this title. It could be a bunch of things, and then it removes the actual instance itself because we don't want to do this same validation on the instance itself, right? So this could be true for title. It could be true for slug. It could be true for content. It doesn't really matter what the query set is. What matters here is that if there is an instance, we don't want that validation error on the instance that we're changing. That's kind of the point. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's go ahead and test it out in both places. So I'm going to make a new title here and say another new title. That one might be taken, so I'll just say dash whatever. And then we add that content. That seems to work fine. And then again, I'll do the one where I for sure already have one, which is Tesla. And sure enough, that works fine. So it's now validating just fine on empty data. And now we go back into our actual post that we're updating. And I keep this as my title and hit send. No longer do I have that error. And I'll just say another value has changed for this data. I hit send. And I refresh in the admin, another value has changed. Cool. So that is just a little bit more advanced validation for any given form to ensure that we can do something like this. Now we just need to delete our objects. For some reason I have this syntax thing going on here. I'm not sure why. I'll just get rid of that comma and replace the order. That seems to solve that syntax error, even though it wasn't a syntax error. Whatever. Okay, so now that we've got this, we need to update our delete view. So what I'm actually going to do in here is just literally say if request.method equals to post, then we'll go ahead and do object.delete. It's really just that simple. And something I missed on the update view, we also want to have the staff member required on here for both of them, right? So the reason I'm doing this request.method has to do with what I want this delete to look like. So inside of delete.html, I'm going to go ahead and say, leave this title and say, are you sure you want to delete? And then have that H1 in there. Perhaps we bring this down to the paragraph. Are you sure you want to delete this? Or the following. Then we just put in a form with the method of post. And we don't need to put the action. Close off that form. We put the CSRF token in here. The form is actually empty otherwise. So we just do button. I'll add a class and we'll say btn, and danger. And we'll say yes, delete. So it's basically an empty form. Sure, I have that token because I need that. And this basically empty form, what it does is it will actually call this method right here and then we'll delete it. So this is really just a confirm page, right? There's other ways to actually go about deleting these things, but this is nice because then it's saying, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Yes, I want to do this. Boom, we go and do it. So after that happens, we actually want to redirect them somewhere else because this view is no longer going to be valid, right? But we'll do that in a second. Let's go ahead and delete one of these. And I'll go into, let's just do hello world and into delete. Now I see, are you sure you want to delete the following? This is my title. Yes, delete. Okay, so now I think it may have been deleted. Let's go ahead and refresh the page. And sure enough, I get a page not found, right? So that's why I want to redirect here, and we'll just return. And if I scroll up to my shortcuts, I can import something called redirect. And so after this method happens, we return the redirect and we take it home or to my blog posts, either one. Okay, so let's try that again. Got my blog post in here, and oh shoot, I don't actually know how to get to any of these. So I have to go into my admin, grab the actual slug itself. All right, then delete, and then yes, delete. And sure enough, that blog post's gone. And we look into the admin again, and sure enough, we only have a few, or we have a few less. Cool. So now we have our delete view.